If you're like me, you hate it when you apply the instant load command to older well cars and they load a floating container on top of nothing. It's really quite annoying because of how unrealistic it is. So I'm going to show you how I edit these well cars to properly load double stack containers when the instant load command is selected. It really has to do with editing the product queues and how they're loaded onto the train car. So let's get into that in a little bit. First I have to edit it in Explorer and edit the config file where the product queue is located. You have to be really careful when entering information into this file, because if it's even one digit off, the game will not like that. Now, for some reason, these well cars in particular will not load more than one queue at a time with the instant load command, even if it does not conflict with another queue. To fix that, I'm merging all the 20-foot container attachment points to the same queue, so that when that queue is fully loaded, it will load two 20-foot containers using the two attachment points for those containers, rather than seeing them as two separate queues. That way it'll load both of them at once instead of only loading one 20-foot container at a time. So the first thing you have to do is change the size to 2. That tells the game that two 20-foot containers can be loaded onto this train car at a time. The attachment points tell the game where on the mesh the containers can be loaded. So I'm going to take the other attachment point for the other 20-foot container and place it in this queue so that it'll load two containers on these two attachment points. So I'm going to put one underneath the 0, and then I'm going to paste the a.container04. That's the other attachment point for the 20-foot container. So now it'll load both of them at once. Now I'm going to do this exact same thing for the other 20-foot container queue, so that if the game happens to select that one, it'll still load two 20-foot containers. I could technically just delete this other queue since it also references the same attachment points, but I tried deleting a queue earlier and it made the train car faulty, so I'm trying to shy away from that. Conflicts with queues tells the game which queues cannot be loaded onto the train car at the same time because they're too big and would collide with each other. Or in the case of containers, because one won't fit underneath the other. Now I'm changing the size to 2 so it can load two 20-foot containers. And I'm using the other attachment point here as well. The attachment point is called a.container04. It might be called something different on another well car. It depends on the one you're working on. Also, I've found out that a lot of train cars made by the same user tend to have very similar config files. So in the case of these well cars that I'm working on, when I'm finished with this one, I can actually copy and paste the entire queue section of the config file over to the rest of the well cars as well, and it will work for them as well because the attachment points for the containers are all in the same location on each well car. So that makes my job a little bit easier. Now, I usually don't use the built-in Aaron containers because they're very pixelated and gross looking compared to other containers that others have made in the past since Trainz 2004. So in the future, I'm probably going to change the QUID numbers for those with a different 20-foot container, but I'll have to look around and experiment a little to figure out which ones can fit, because not every container might fit. Different ones might attach to the train car at a different location. In fact, the ones that I'm going to replace on this train car, they hover over the train car a little bit. However, it's not noticeable unless you literally place the camera inside the train car. So I'm okay with that a little bit, as long as it's not too noticeable. Now, when using the instant load command, the 40-foot containers are usually the ones that end up hovering over the train car with no container underneath it. So these are the ones that need this treatment the most. I'm also going to add a few containers that are from Dave Snow because I want to see if they can be stacked on top of each other. If not, then obviously I'm going to have to make changes to that and place them somewhere else under a different queue that only references the bottom attachment point. I'm not sure if there's a limit to how many queues can be referenced in one attachment point, but I'm going to add quite a few. Now, I like variety, so I'm probably going to add quite a lot of containers, probably around 20. Remember how I said not to delete a queue that already exists in the train car? Well, this is going to bite me in the butt later on. I'm not sure why, but for some reason, if you delete a queue that references an attachment point in the train car, you get an error message that basically says that a queue is missing or an attachment point is missing. I don't really know why this happens, but I'm going to end up having to put that queue back into this list later on. However, I'm going to remove the errand containers because, like I said earlier, I don't really like the way they look that much. They're a bit cloudy as far as the textures are concerned. So I'm going to replace them with a different 40-foot container later on. I'm going to use this bottom queue to only reference single load only containers to be loaded onto the bottom. But for this top attachment point, I'm going to add the attachment point for the bottom so that when it's fully loaded, it'll load 2 containers. And as you can see, I already changed the size from 1 to 2 to tell the game that 2 can be loaded here. It seems to be the case that when you give it 2 containers in one queue, it automatically loads the bottom one first. I'm not really sure how or why it knows to do that, but for some reason when the queues are separate, it just loads the top one only and then has them floating over the train car. I'm going to create a new queue that only references the bottom attachment point, and I'm going to use it to load double stack loads, such as the double stack containers that Dave Snow makes. Technically, I could just include these in the other attachment point I made earlier that only loads bottom containers, because it fits in the same attachment point. This is just to show you how to add a queue if you wanted to. Now, it should be noted that just because you add a queue doesn't mean the queued number for the object you want to load onto the train car will fit. The attachment point has to be in the correct location, and if it's not, it won't fit on the train car properly. Theoretically, you could add attachment points, but I'm not really too sure how to add an attachment point to a mesh that has already been created. I know there is such thing as an attachment maker, but I never could figure out how to use it. Maybe someday I'll learn how to, though. Anyway, I just need to memorize which attachment point is supposed to be used for the bottom load of the 40-foot container. First, I'm going to put down the size, and since the loads already come with the container on top of them, the size count is going to be 1. And the initial count is going to be 0. Though, technically, if I wanted to, I could make it 1 so it would automatically load that queue. If several queues are referenced under the same load, the same attachment point, and you want it to be loaded by default, you have to choose a default cargo to go onto the train car, so know which one of the many queued numbers you referenced will be loaded by default. I don't remember what you have to type for that. It's probably default queue or something like that. But I'd have to look at a train car that's already loaded to know for sure. The attachment points tell the game where the load is going to be attached to the train car. And of course, I'm going to tell it to reference the attachment point for 40-foot containers on the bottom of the train car. And not the top one, because that would just be silly. And of course, everything you quote has to be unquoted, or it'll cause a really big mess. The same thing for these brackets. Everything you bracket has to be unbracketed as well, in case I forgot to mention that. Now, when typing a config file, remember to take your time, because if you go too fast, you might make a mistake, and then you'll have to figure out where you made that mistake, and that'll take a whole lot of reading very carefully and slowly to try to figure out where you made your mistake. There have been times where I made a mistake where I forgot to unquote something and I could not figure out where it was. Okay, so the allowed products is a list of products that can go onto the train car at this attachment point. I'm going to reference the QID numbers of the double stack loads created by Dave Snow, because I've already tested them in this train car before and I know that they'll fit in here. Kind of. Like I said, they're going to be floating a few inches off the ground, but you won't notice it unless you place the camera in the train car, and who's going to do that, obviously? Like, if the train's just going by, you won't even notice that. So far, I have not found any other containers that fit in this train car perfectly, i.e. completely on the ground connected to the train car, besides the ones that it comes with. Now, after I finish adding the QIDs that I wanted to reference, of course I have to remember to unbracket this, because if I don't, it'll create some kind of issue where the Q container spills into the bogey container, and that's not going to work correctly. Anyway, you also need conflicts with Q. This tells the game which Qs cannot be loaded at the same time because they will overlap each other. Now, for conflicts with Qs, I'm going to copy one from another similar Q because I'm way too lazy to type all this by myself. And try to figure out which ones it would actually conflict with. I might come back here and change it later if I find out one of these is wrong. Anyway, that looks about right, hopefully. Just gonna give it a quick once over to make sure I typed everything correctly. Yeah, that looks good. So I'm gonna save it, exit out of it, and submit unable to... What in the world? Okay, it's saying that it contains the wrong QID or something. The QID tells the game which QID number this object is, so that has to match the QID of the actual object, or something is wrong. So I just gotta look for QID, which is somewhere. It's in a different place in every single object, so I gotta really look for it. Oh, here it is. Okay, let me check and make sure it is the correct number, because sometimes this error gets triggered even when it's correct. Okay, look very closely at it. Look at each number one by one. Let's see. Okay, so as far as I can tell, it's the same number. Let me go over it one more time. Yeah, it looks like it's the correct number. So, okay, here's a crazy idea. Let's take this, cut the number, and paste it somewhere else in here, and see if that fixes the issue. I'm gonna laugh if this actually works. Okay, I pasted it to the top instead of where it was earlier. Usually, the location doesn't really make that much of a difference as long as it's not inside a container or something. Okay, that fixed it. Now it says missing dependencies. Let's see, what did I do? Oh, I accidentally typed the number that doesn't exist. Silly me. Gotta fix that. I was wrong by 1 digit. Okay. This is why I wish they brought back Content Creator Plus, because adding things like CUID numbers was a lot easier there. You just added the object that you wanted, and it automatically wrote the CUID number in the config file. However, it wasn't without its faults. There were times when it would delete very important text from a CUID file, and then a locomotive wouldn't have numbers appearing correctly. So, you know, if they brought it back, they would definitely have to work out some bugs that it has. Anyway, let's see. Okay, now it's faulty. I was afraid of this. This means that I typed something incorrectly, and now I gotta find the error that I made. Let's see, attachment point. Let's see. Tag. I don't know what any of this means. Let's see. Let's see. Why is it talking about the bogey? What did I do wrong? Apparently, I messed up something about how the bogies are attached to the train car somehow. I may have typed the container incorrectly then. I may have forgotten to unbracket something and then it spilled over into the bogey container. That may have been what happened. So now I have to go through all of this and try to figure out where I made my mistake. I think I may have added one too many spaces somewhere or something. Oh yeah, I think I did. Maybe, I don't really know. Okay, I think I forgot to unbracket something, and it caused one queue to spill over into another queue, and that queue to spill over into the bogey container. I don't know. Let's see. I think that may have been what happened. If that's the case, then... Okay, it looks like I may have been off by a couple of spaces, and that may have triggered the error. So, I gotta place those back where they're supposed to go. Well, this is gonna take a while. Move initial count back where it's supposed to go. And then move that 0 back where it's supposed to go. Let's see. Attachment points. I believe that should also be in the same spot. And that means the brackets should be there too. Okay, let's see. What else did I get wrong? Okay, so let's move those brackets back. As well as that unbracket, or whatever you... I don't really know what these things are called. Okay, I'm not sure, but I think that may have done it. Let's see. First I need to see how many spaces are supposed to be here. Okay, that was off by 2 spaces, apparently. Okay, that probably means that the allowed product list is also in the wrong location. So yeah, earlier I said even if you're off by a couple spaces, it still matters. So that has to be fixed. Okay, so I moved all this stuff in the wrong location, so I have to backspace a couple of times here as well for every single one that I added here. Well, that's going to take a while, so let's just fast forward into the future. Okay, I think I put everything back where it's supposed to be, so I'm going to exit out of this after I save it, submit the changes, and hopefully it's okay. It's still faulty. What did I do wrong this time? Let's see. The attachment point. What? Let's see. Oh, you know what? That queue that I deleted earlier that references these attachment points, that's what these errors are about. So I have to bring those. I have to bring that queue back in order to fix this error. Luckily, there are other train cars created by the same creator that use a very similar config file, so I can just copy it from somewhere else. Let's see. The 40 feet bottom errand one that I deleted earlier is triggering the error, so I have to bring it back in order to get rid of that error. I'm not really sure why, but you know, it's what has to be done to fix the error, so I'll do it. So I copied that. Now I'm going to go back to the one that I was editing earlier, and I'm just going to paste it in the what do you call it, the queue container. That should fix the error. Just want to make sure everything is where it's supposed to be, or else it'll trigger another error. Okay, so I think that's correct. Just gonna do another quick inspection to make sure everything's where it's supposed to be. Okay, it should be fine. So I'm going to submit the changes, and this time I think it'll work. Well, that did it, and it's no longer faulty. And look, now it references all of these containers that I told it to reference earlier. So it'll load either one of these containers onto the train car when I select the instant load command. Now let's test it in the game to see if it works. I placed cars I didn't edit onto the track too, so I can give you a comparison of how they will load the containers versus how the car that I just edited will load the containers. It is now time to test it out. The car I edited loaded a double stack container. This one I didn't edit loaded just one 20-foot container. These are cars I edited earlier, and they loaded double stack containers. And this one I just edited today, this one is loading two 20-foot containers instead of just one. Which means it's pretty much mission accomplished. And that's compared to this one, which isn't edited and only loaded one 20-foot container. So it looks like my hunch was correct. Those ones that I didn't edit yet loaded errand containers. I'm gonna replace the errand containers with a different one later. Probably one of Dave Snow's containers. Alright, and this has been how to edit a well car so it loads containers correctly when the instant load command is selected. Thank you for watching this video, and goodbye.